Been a weird sanding video without any sandpaper. You won't hear me anyway, because Bertha's loud as hell. Hey everybody, it's Kyle with Flippin' San Diego, and I just wanted to touch on a subject that's near and dear to our hearts, because we do it with almost every project. And that is sanding, something that is both very useful and very, very messy, and usually loud and sometimes time consuming, but there are a few tools that you can use and a few tips and tricks that I've learned through lots of trial and error over the past about 5 years or so doing this, that will hopefully help all of you on your journey to flip in your own pieces. Now, there are a few ways to start. A lot of people just start with hand sanding. Now, the only difference between hand sanding and power sanding is you have to put in all the energy. So if you're willing to put in the work, the sweat equity, get your hands dirty, you can hand sand stuff for very cheap, because you can buy all different kinds of grits. You just simply replace it into this sanding block. This was about $3. Each one of these is less than 10. So you can actually use these over and over and over again, and it's pretty affordable. However, it takes a lot longer. You can even buy these big pro packs that have all different types of grits, and I'll talk about grit in just a few minutes here. But these you can cut to size for whatever type of sanding block. You can even make your own out of 2x4s, clamp them together, use a little glue, whatever you want. You can make anything to fit maybe a unique curve, something like this. You might have to make your own jig to sand some of these corners if you don't want to just do it with your hands. So hand sanding can get you a lot finer detail work, especially on some of these trickier pieces. But when it comes down to just absolutely blasting through a piece and getting a gross top or an old varnish off, maybe a stain, you want to get down to that wood, this is the way to go. You want to go with some type of power sander. Now, it's a little bit louder, and it's of course going to make your hands vibrate a little bit, but it'll get the job done a lot quicker. We're going to start with the biggest and the baddest. This is a belt sander. My wife affectionately calls this Bertha, and that is a very fitting name, because this thing puts out a lot of power and will blow through a varnish very, very quickly. So you do have to know exactly what you're going to do. If you want to hog off some material really quickly, this is what you're going to want to go with. Now, it does go in one direction, so when you turn it on, it always spins this way. So if I'm doing this tabletop right over here, you'll notice the wood grain all runs in the same direction, right? It goes from that side to this side. Do not turn Bertha the wrong way. If you turn her this way, you're gonna have a bunch of gouge marks going across the grain that you're gonna have to then go back and go higher and higher grain on your, or higher and higher grit on your sandpaper in order to smooth out all of those scratches. So make sure you just stick with the wood grain, and that way, even if you don't go all the way up to 220 in wet sanding, you don't have to worry about any of those scratches really showing up. So we'll come back over here. Once you've taken off a lot of the material with Bertha, you can switch to either a random orbital sander or a finish sander. Now, I have both, but I kind of prefer the random orbital sander, mostly because it does a little bit more work for me, and I can kind of move it around. It's a little bit lighter, and I like the movement. This one has really fine micro movements, so it's great for getting a really smooth finish, but you kind of have to spend your time and go in really small circles. This one, I can put a little bit higher grit, talking 80, maybe 120, and you get a nice smooth finish, especially on these older pieces where the wood's really dry. You don't want to take off too much, but the best part about this one is you just unzip it, like you just unvelcro. It's so easy. You need a different type of grit. You're moving up, you slap it on, give it a quick push, you're right back into it. So this is one of my favorite plays. With this one, it's great, but you do have to unclip some of these. Now, every sander is going to come with its own type of mechanism. A lot of them take advice from each other, and they have similar mechanisms, but it's really hard to beat this Velcro. Now, what I will say, a little tip, buy a nicer product. It's not that much more. It's usually like $1 more per pack. Something like these Gator Power sanding wheels, I guess you'd call them, because they have a little bit higher quality Velcro on the back, and that way it'll stick for your whole project. You won't end up flinging your sanding disc off in the middle of a project. That has happened to me before. Doesn't really hurt because it is paper, but it is startling. So just something, spend that extra $1. These will last longer, and you won't have any hiccups along the way. Now we'll come back over to this particular piece. because it is so unique with the shapes that it has, I do have a couple variants in these sponges, these sanding sponges. These will come in handy for getting these little spots because you can actually push this sponge down and it will actually form these little crevices and whatnot without me having to do any type of jigs or anything like that that I had mentioned earlier. So I can get nice and easy into all of these little spots, these nice little pretty curves, all with just the same sanding block. Now, again, anytime you see a finish or a grain going one direction, stick with that direction. Even if you have to go side to side, kind of opposite of what I was just doing. So go with the grain. I know it'll be a little bit longer, might be a little harder, but it's definitely something you should go with. Second, we want to talk about safety, of course, because anytime you're using a power tool, be sure you at least have some eye protection. Now when I'm sanding, I prefer these. These are full coverage goggles. I think they look pretty good too, right, Courtney? Yeah. What that does is just keeps any particles from kind of coming in from the sides. Now lastly, always have a respirator when you're sanding. The particles from wood have been shown in studies to show to be related to cancer. So be sure that you don't end up with lung cancer because you love woodworking. We want you to be able to woodwork for the rest of your life. So just get a nice respirator. We all know that the kind of disposable ones are in high demand right now. So grab a respirator like this. It's used for fine particles. You can use this when paint spraying, which is great. Very multi-purpose, and it's actually pretty comfortable. So you just slap it on just like this, and you can breathe in and out nice and easy. The only issue I have with this is that sometimes it gets a little moist in there. So just be sure to wipe it out every once in a while, and then you won't have any real issues like breakouts or anything like that. Something for everyone, right? So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna set up my random orbit sander, and I'm gonna do this top real quick just so you guys can kind of see. I might even throw on Big Bertha, take off a little bit just to show the differences between those two particular power sanders. Another little tip for you starting out DIYers, ask for gift cards to Home Depot, Lowe's, any type of hardware store near your house. They pile up over time and you can buy those big ticket items. I'm gonna put on my respirator so I won't be able to talk to you guys, but you won't hear me anyway because Bertha's loud as hell. Alright, you guys, as you heard, she puts out some power. She hogged off the entire finish of this thing in about 15 seconds. So, belt sander is great for removing material. Now I'm going to show you a little bit with the Orbit sander, just to show you the difference and kind of how they move and what they're used for. Now, the Orbit sander can give you a lot of material removal as well. However, it doesn't quite go as fast. So because it has a smaller grip pad, you can see not as much circumference. I should probably put one on there, huh? We're gonna go with an 80 here. Put that on. Line that up, there we go. That would have been a weird sanding video without any sandpaper. So I'm gonna go ahead and mask back up. We'll get started. See the difference just in speed alone. That's going to be your friend when you're trying to remove all this material, but with a high grit, or a low grit I should say, you're going to see those scratches and it's all going to have to go in one direction. With the random Orbit sander, it goes all over the place in kind of a unique random pattern, so it doesn't leave a trail of scratches. It's going to do a bunch of small removal of that material kind of in a circular pattern. So you just keep that moving in little small concentric circles. You don't want to stay in one spot too long when you're sanding with any power tool because you'll end up creating a hole. So you keep things moving, nice even flow. If you want to see what kind of stuff you've done, don't leave the sander down. Pick it up, check your work, and then go back into it. keep running over the same spots until you get the nice even coat that you want. One of the questions we had, and one of the things my wife asked me as well when she first started learning, was how do you tell when you're done sanding an already finished piece? Now, if you're gonna do a varnish and you wanna take it all the way off down to the bare wood, obviously you're gonna see a little bit of a color change. So this is the old varnish with the stain. Here's just a couple of rough passes with Bertha. You get into a couple more passes, and then down here you have an almost perfectly fresh wood. So you'll see a drastic difference between the stain that the factory put on, or whoever prior had the piece put on, between that and the natural wood. Now, a lot of furniture is made out of pine, but if you're lucky enough to find something that is made out of a different species, maybe a hardwood, oak, mahogany, anything like that, those are gonna be a different color. So feel free to hop online, Google what type of wood you know you have, and just see what it looks like naturally when it's already been cut without any stain or finish on it. And that'll give you a good idea of what color you're shooting for when you are sanding. So if you get here and you're kind of in this half place where it looks like all the shiny varnish is off, but you still have these streaks of brown, you might still have to do a little bit more sanding, because that's probably some residual stain from the prior product. So go ahead, feel free, if it's a solid wood piece and you have a higher grit on your sandpaper or on your sander, don't be too shy, because you'll kind of see the difference. You'll see the wood change until you get it to a place where you like it. And especially if you're gonna restain it, that doesn't matter necessarily as much. That'll absorb a lot of the color of the stain. But if you're just gonna put a mineral oil on there because you like the natural look, don't be shy. Take it all the way down until it looks fresh as a daisy. Let's talk about grit real quick. So grit is a pretty simple, straightforward process of kind of measuring how your sandpaper is going to affect the wood. So the lower the number kind of indicates that the lower amount of grains of sand are in there per square inch. So they might be bigger, they're definitely going to be bigger. You can see here on this 60 grit, those are visible rocks almost. I mean, you've got chunks of sand right there in that paper. So that is going to take off a lot of material, but it's also going to leave a lot of scratches. So that's something where you would start with. So you always start with a low number, finish with a high number. Unless you're taking off a veneer, then you're going to take and start at a very high number. If it's veneer and you just want to take off the top stain and varnish, I start with 220 and I just put in the time, because the veneer is very, very thin and you don't want to ruin that veneer and blow through down into the particle board. That's really ugly. So veneers can be sanded. You just have to be very careful. Start really high and stay high, okay? Now, if you're doing a whole wood piece, something that's solid like this top is all wood, you can start as low as you want. It'll save you some time. I like to start with about 80 grit on older pieces so I don't scuff them up too much. This right here is a 100 grit, and you can see it progress. So it goes 100, 150, all the way up to 220. You can literally see how many grains of sand are in there. A lot bigger ones, and it comes all the way down to this fine grit sand. This is your finish work over here. The higher the number, the closer to the finish line. Just remember that, okay? That's gonna give you that nice smooth finish. And that is pretty much all you need to know about grit when it comes to sandpaper. Start low, end high, right? If you guys are wondering where we got all of our tools, feel free to scroll down. We are gonna have links down below to all different kinds of tools that I have, that I've really enjoyed. Also, some of the higher end tools, we can link those as well. I'll also show you some of the sandpapers that I've preferred over the years. There's a lot of different brands out there, so some I like better than others, some hold up more. It all kind of comes down to cost and your preference, but we'll definitely give you a nice wide variety. So feel free to check us out down below, and don't forget to like us and subscribe. You can also find us on Instagram at Flippin' San Diego. Thanks for stopping by.